Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome into Attacking Third. If you're here with us live on YouTube, thank you. It's great to see you. It's great to hear from you. Like this video, subscribe to our page, and then join the conversation in our chat that is live on this video. That way we get to see what you guys are talking about and what's going on. Good morning. Alongside Sandra Herrera, I'm Lisa Carlin. Sandra, how's it going, bud? How are you today?
I'm doing great, Lisa. Not gonna lie. Woke up today just like this regular old day. Nothing's really happening. Just kidding. We're gonna talk about things. Yeah, just kidding. We're gonna talk about things that are going on. But yeah, Wednesdays have rapidly become my favorite day of the week because I know I'm gonna get to sit down and hang out with you, start off my days. Just happy to be here with you, bud.
Me too, Sandra. I mean, it's like the good old days when we jump on here. We got our community online. We roll out as a pod. We just get to vibe and really talk about the things that we love and want to talk about, and that is the sport. And today, we're also adding in some other flavors to the stew, the Attacking Third stew that we're making, because we're continuing our countdown to Kansas City episodes every single Wednesday where we are recapping one NWSL final leading up to the NWSL championship that is set for November 23rd on CBS at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So today we're talking 2019 NWSL final. You teased it. There's big news out of Chicago, a little bit of a rebrand. I'll just drop that there for you. Stick around to hear what happens. And then we're talking extreme youth at the pro level, pros, cons, what our thoughts are on it. And then, of course, in case you missed it, we always follow up with anything news noteworthy that we may have missed, you may have missed, and we haven't had a chance to talk about yet. It's a solid rundown we have today. But if you're with us live on YouTube, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you're with us on a podcast, thank you. We appreciate it. Anything they need to know, Sandra?
Just get ready to relive some memories. I think I've said it every week, Lise, that I love our Countdown to Kansas City segment. And I think it's the timing couldn't be more perfect for us to talk about the teams that we're going to talk about in this upcoming segment and then a later segment in the show.
Oof, you dropped it. There's a little bit of a Sandra bomb right there for you. Okay, let's dive into it. Countdown to Kansas City, revisiting the 2019 NWSL Final. It took place Saturday, October 27th at WakeMed Park in Cary, North Carolina, the home of the North Carolina Courage. And the Courage hosted the Chicago Red Stars. Kickoff was at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So we're getting closer and closer to like prime time, what we are now in these kickoff times. Over 10,000 fans in attendance at WakeMed. It was North Carolina against the Chicago Red Stars. And because I don't like to bury a lead, the Courage won 4-0 over the Red Stars. Plus, it happened like 5 years ago. So it's old news. Let's talk about how they got there, their road to the playoffs and to the championship. North Carolina Courage were coming off winning the 2018 NWSL championship, and they finished 2019 in the number one spot in the standings. So they won their second Shield in a row, 15 wins, 4 draws, 5 losses on 49 points. The Chicago Red Stars were right behind them in second place, only on 44 points. So they just barely were behind North Carolina. 14 wins, 2 draws, 8 losses for the Red Stars. When you look at these individual teams, North Carolina specifically, for the 5th year in a row and the 4th year by herself, North Carolina forward Lynn Williams led her team with goals. She had 12 in 2019. She was second in the league. Midfielder Dabinia of North Carolina Courage had 7 assists. Good for second in the league. Meanwhile, for the Chicago Red Stars, this was a breakout year for forward Sam Kerr. She won the Golden Boot that year with 18 goals, and she set that record as best all time for the next 5 years until, of course, this year, 2024, when Kansas City forward Temwa Shawinga came along and shattered that record. But also for the Chicago Red Stars, it was Yuki Nagasato who had the league leading 8 assists that year. So ultimately, once the final happened, it was number 1 North Carolina against number 2 Chicago Red Stars. Sandra, when you think about that final and that 2019 year as a whole, was it number 1 against number 2 in the final?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was part of the billing in the lead up to this final, right? This is the moment that I've mentioned it on this segment, that where I find myself at these championship finals, all the way through to all of the ones that we're going to eventually recap along the way. But this one in particular felt a little bit different from some of the number 1 and number 2 kind of head-to-heads that we witnessed in the past, whether it was Courage going up against Thorns, or in this case, the Courage going up against Chicago. Everything about the Red Stars to this date during 2019 was that they were building towards something special. I think prior to this season, maybe their 2016 team was a team that felt that maybe they could go all the way. And since then, it was really just everyone's had all eyes on that Courage team, that roster of players that kept finding their way, winning shields and back to the final. But this one was a season in which the Red Stars had often gotten the better of the Courage. And there was already a little bit of a regular season rivalry brewing between them, because so many Courage players would say that Chicago was such a tough team for them to play. And so it felt like maybe that this was going to be one of these sort of matches that could show off some of that parity, in a championship match finally. But we end up seeing something happen completely different in this match. It ends up being an absolute blowout.
It definitely does. But on their way there, North Carolina had a little bit of a test in their opening playoff match in the semifinal. It was number 1 North Carolina Courage against number 4 Seattle Reign. North Carolina ends up winning in extra time 4-1, but through 88 minutes, it was scoreless in this first semifinal. Then North Carolina's Heather O'Reilly Heo, she earns a penalty kick for her side, or she takes a penalty kick for her side. They go up 1-0. And then in the stoppage time at the end of this semifinal, Seattle equalize. It's Ifeoma Onumonu who gets one back for Seattle to send it into extra time. A free kick in extra time, 99th minute from North Carolina's midfielder Debinha. Ultimately, she scores the game winner, but there would go on to be 2 more. An own goal in the 108th minute that's forced by North Carolina's Kristen Hamilton. Lou Barnes for Seattle ends up tapping it in. And then in the 109th minute, Crystal Dunn, she makes it 4 for North Carolina. But it took until extra time for North Carolina to actually consistently find the back of the net and put away their chances, because this semifinal was like one of the most exciting games.
Oh my
I
goodness.
remember watching this and being like, this could be a score of like 6-5 right now.
Goodness.
It was crazy.
We absolutely had it out in the press box in Bridgeview when we were watching the Portland semifinal against Chicago Red Stars. And we were like, oh my God, this is crazy. But at the same time, it just was indicative of and absolutely representative of this Courage side, that how they could just sort of turn a game on its head at a moment's notice. And that's what made them so dangerous during this era.
Just dominate. North Carolina dominated. You teased it. Chicago Red Stars, the second place team in the league, took on third place Portland Thorns. The Red Stars win 1-0, of course. I mean, you could have guessed this. Sam Kerr scores in the opening 8th minute to give Chicago the lift. Ultimately, Sam Kerr wins the Golden Boot on 18 goals, and she's named MVP that year. You, Sandra, being in Chicago, being in the press box for majority of those Red Stars games, you got to watch Sam Kerr up close and personal. She was pretty lethal that year.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible because this was also the 2019 World Cup. So every 4 years there tends to be a heightened level of hyper focus on women's soccer because of that major international tournament. And so there were a lot of eyes on this team. There were a lot of eyes on what they were doing during this season. And it was nice to watch this team deliver on all of those things over the course of a regular season. I'm not going to act like it wasn't a blast covering this particular roster of players. They were just riddled with star power, And again, to that moment, there wasn't a lot for Chicago to sort of hang their hat on when it came to the postseason. And there was a lot to be hopeful about with a player like Sam Kerr, who was breaking and setting records at that time and winning a Golden Boot. And even that, Chicago had not had a player kind of win, individual type of award like that. I remember, a lot of the ruckus around Casey Kruger, then Casey Short not getting Defender of the Year that year. A lot of, disappointment in that. But everything about that moment was iconic, really, for not just those players and the fans that day in the stadium. I think if you find yourself going back and looking at highlights, you could just read in the body language how big of a moment it was for him to get that win.
It was a huge moment for Chicago. Sam Kerr ends up with the Golden Boot. She ends up with the Most Valuable Player of the Year. You touched on Defender of the Year. It went to Becky Sauerbrunn out of Utah Royals at the end of 2019. But as we're recapping these various NWSL finals, we've started in late August. Then we've moved to September, and now we're in late October 27th in North Carolina, but it was hot, over 80 degrees for kickoff of this 4 p.m. Eastern kickoff. So there was hydration breaks throughout this match. There was a lot going on. So North Carolina, they host the final. Let me take you through their starting 11 and who they rolled out with, because there were some superstars on both of these sides. For North Carolina Courage, in goal, it was Steph LeBay, Jaylene Hinkle, Abby Urseg, Abby Dahlkemper, and Heather O'Reilly across the back line. Denise O'Sullivan, Sam Ewis, Dabinia, and Crystal Dunn as that box midfield. And the dynamic, lethal duo of Lynn Williams and Jess McDonald up top. Off the bench, North Carolina had Carrie Riccaro sub in the back line. McCall Zerboni subbed into the midfield, and Kristen Hamilton, who ends up forcing the own goal for North Carolina in the extra time. She subbed in up top as well for Jess McDonald. But just absolute stars and legends on this North Carolina side who had just won the Shield. Meanwhile, for the Chicago Red Stars, you could argue that also really big names, Sandra, really big influential players in this final for the Red Stars.
Yeah, massive. I think when you look at this lineup, starting from the back to the front, Alyssa Nair, the longtime keeper, getting the start in net, Sarah Gordon, Julie Ertz, Katie Naughton, and Casey Short rounding out the back line at time. And we'll talk about that back line and the adjustment they had to make. But Danny Colaprico, Morgan Bryan, now Gatra, Yuki Nagasato, Vanessa DiBernardo, Savannah McCaskill, and Sam Kerr, kind of rounding out that front six a little bit for the Red Stars. Just again, incredible names. I think when you're looking at both sides of the pitch here, and for players that end up making their way in this game as well, Katie Johnson, Maria Sanchez, I believe got some late minutes in there as well, and players that we are familiar with across the league at this point. Kayla Sharple's available on the bench for Chicago during this time as well.
Yeah, it's so funny to see some of the older names too, right? Even like Casey Short, now Casey Kruger, Julie Ertz, like there's just a lot. Morgan Bryan, who's now Morgan Gautral.
Yeah.
A lot has changed, but also a lot has stayed the same, because this match was exciting. Ultimately, North Carolina get a 4 goals by the end of it, but it started really fast for North Carolina. They had a game plan. They were at home in front of their home crowd, and they come out on the front foot. Dabinia getting the opening goal in just the 4th minute. And the second one coming for the Courage by Jess McDonald, assisted from Lynn Williams in the 26th minute. And Crystal Dunn gets one more before halftime. So the Courage already up 3-0 after 45 minutes. This game, though, Sandra, you took it in person, correct? In Wake Med?
Yeah, this is where we have to shout out the very incredible special community of women's soccer. I was covering this still sort of on a freelance and independent level, and the only way I was able to get out to cover this game was because folks rallied together to send me to this game.
That's so cool.
Shout out to Bree. She knows who she is, but had a hand in sending myself, and shout out to my friend and colleague Claire Watkins, got out there to cover this game specifically for the Red Sox. It was a big moment for this franchise, and obviously there was disappointment in this type of start in scoreline. I think it's important to note, as we were going through these starting lineups, for people who don't remember, Tierna Davison was part of the Chicago Red Stars squad for a long time, was part of that World Cup winning team with the U.S. national team in 2019 as well, and played a really big part as this defensive stalwart for the Red Stars at the time, where we saw that combination of the back line there in front of Alyssa Nair. And Davidson's kind of evolution over the course of the Red Stars is that she was also able to kind of handle responsibilities out wide or in that center back position. It was part of what has made her such a special player. But in the training days, literal days leading up to this final, Tierna Davison sustains a devastating ankle injury that ultimately needs surgery and keeps her out of this final, and ultimately kind of shakes up Chicago's entire game plan moving forward, because this is absolute respect and credit to the North Carolina Courage, but they were the team to beat during this probably first half of that previous decade of NWSL. This roster and their tactics and the way they executed them so perfectly throughout games that there was a little bit of a sub narrative of, well, why don't other teams just figure out a way to break down that North Carolina Courage box? And the Chicago Red Stars had plans to kind of do a little bit of a sneak attack in this final. They were going to roll out in a 3-back. That only happens if you have Tierna Davison. She gets injured. They do not do that. They end up rolling out in a safe, kind of fluctuating 4-3-3. And it gets off to a really bad start. You had mentioned the rundown of goals, conceding a goal in the opening 5 minutes of a final. No way you want to start. And it just ended up playing out where you had two teams, yes, ranked 1 and 2, but it was so evident that one particular team had been there at this moment numerous times and knows how to go out there and win a final. And that's the type of dominating performance we saw from the Courage that day.
Obviously, you have a crystal ball and you can see the future and the past, Sandra. If Davison was healthy and the Red Stars rolled out in a 3-back, how different would this game have been?
I think maybe it would have been, a period of adjustment. Like maybe you see what we typically see in a big type of final, like maybe some nerve, some tactical figuring out, chess match. Like you prepare for a team a certain kind of way when you go into big games like that. And if you have a Red Stars team kind of rolling out in a way which they kind of hadn't all year, and then they're doing that in a final, it kind of might take you out of your comfort zone a little bit. You got to try something. Not only were the Courage absolutely dominant, they're at home at this point, in a neutral sort of, pre-selected site. But I absolutely think the Courage still take this one. Maybe it's not a 4-0 blowout, but I still think everything about this Courage side had the Red Stars number, at least in the postseason, even if the Red Stars had them in the regular season.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this North Carolina side was so good. They just had such confidence in the roles that the individual players were playing. Even in that 4-box that was a little new and wonky at times, but they still executed it very effectively because they had really intelligent footballers on the pitch. They also had really athletic players. So if they got pulled out of position and if they were moved, they could track back. And their rest defense wasn't necessarily there. It was more that they could recover and get back into things. But you're exactly right. In the opening 5 minutes, when you concede, and then by the 30-minute mark, you're also down another one, and you're starting to feel a little bit deflated heading into that 35th minute right before halftime. You're just like 10 minutes to go. Let's just carry it out. And the opposition of North Carolina Courage is just like constantly running and dominating and creating chances. And then they get another one. Like at halftime, when you're down 3-0 in a final on the road, you're just like, please let this be
over. That was me. At times I was like, oof, this is tough. Blow the whistle.
Let this be over. Ultimately, North Carolina gets the 4th goal by Sam Ewis in the 61st minute, and they just dominate throughout the entirety of this game. 21 shots for the Courage, 10 of them on target. The Red Stars had 13 shots, only 2 on target. North Carolina dominated in possession. They had 3.23 XG in this game. There was just a lot of momentum. Ultimately, North Carolina midfielder Debinha is named the MVP of this final. Who impressed you in this match, Sandra, whether it's for Chicago or North Carolina, but which players stood out to you in their performance?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I hate to go with the obvious, but Debinha, I mean, you want to talk about someone who oddly on this team maybe went a little bit underrated at moments, just again, because we're talking about the type of stars that we see for both sides on this day. But the way this player just sort of kind of reintroduced herself as like, no. I am also a star on the North Carolina Courage side. It was absolutely a well-earned finals MVP performance by the Brazilian international. And I would argue really kind of launched her into this kind of career trajectory where it's like, she became a face and a star of this league. We started to hear rumors about this type of player getting attention overseas. Like it's in these moments in which you really are able to kind of make that name for yourself with an increased amount of eyeballs on such important games. And she had an incredible performance in this one. There were really no answers for this players. We're talking about misconduct summaries, right? Cindy Bernardo, I believe those fouls were against me. I could be wrong, but just an absolute menace on this day.
Yeah, if they're gonna get a yellow, you might as well try to stop one of the best players.
What else can you do at that point? Yeah, absolutely.
It's hilarious. North Carolina win 4-0 over the Chicago Red Stars. It's a 4-goal win in a final, becoming the largest margin of victory in championship history. They also do it at home, making history as the first team to win a league title on their home field. And they win the NWSL Shield and NWSL Championship for the second year in a row. To say that this was a North Carolina dynasty is a bit of an underrated statement. They were electric. They could do everything. They were unstoppable. They had a lot of great pieces that came together at the right time to celebrate this historic 2019 NWSL championship win. These pictures that we're showing right now, they're awesome, Sandra. These are awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if there's we're ever going to see a better moment, essentially a hometown team getting to play their final, in home
Pretty
stadium,
cool.
and just it's pretty cool.
Very cool to see. Congratulations to the 2019 North Carolina Courage on their 4-0 win in the final. It's so funny when I'm like, hey, congrats, because this happened so long ago.
Congrats from the past, back to the future.
Congrats from the past. Well, that was fun, taking a trip down memory lane. If you liked it, come back next week. We're going to talk the next one, 2021 NWSL Championship. There is some breaking news this morning out of Chicago. Sandra, we're getting your reaction about the new rebrand next. Stick with us. Hey everyone, welcome back to Attacking Third. Earlier today, Wednesday, October 23rd, the Chicago Red Stars, after nearly 20 years, have announced a new name and a new logo set to debut at the conclusion of the 2024 playoffs and at the conclusion of the season for 2025. They will now be called the Chicago Stars Football Club. This is big news out of the Windy City, Sandra, and everyone wants to know, what is your take on the rebrand?
Oh my goodness, Sandra's take. Listen, my take on the rebrand is that it's fine. It's probably similar to a lot of other people's reactions. There's always going to be that spectrum of reactions to a rebrand, and there's going to be two extremes, like one where it's devastating, one where it's like confusion and like people don't understand why, and then there's maybe going to just be like mid, which is like it's fine. And that's kind of, I think, what a lot of this for me, is for someone who goes here, it just kind of makes a little bit of sense. I have been able to see and hear kind of the struggles in having a brand, a women's soccer brand that can really carve out a space in a very, very sports saturated market. And that has been part of the issue in Chicago, in the Red Stars, now Stars FC's foothold in market. And so there's been a lot of confusion, honestly, before in the past. I even as recent as maybe just 5 to 6 years ago, and in my time covering the league and this team specifically, I mean, it's so funny to sort of think about how, folks who are diehards maybe found themselves in Chicago and wanted to take in the Red Stars game, and maybe they were leaving back to wherever they were going from whichever airport, and they're putting up pictures from O'Hare Airport saying, look at all this cool Chicago Red Stars merchandise. And it's literally just sweaters of the city's flag. And so that's part of the disconnect a little bit. Right. And so I think there was intention in this rebrand. I think once the new ownership change kind of came in, that this was a little bit going to happen, that maybe we could see some of the writing on the wall. We saw over the last season, maybe even 18 months, that the use of the crest was much more limited. We saw that secondary logo being used a lot more, which was just kind of a C with a star in it. And that included branding around the stadium. And that included in marketing for the team and social presence for the team. The hashtags also, I think last year's was Shy Stars. This year was With the Stars. There was things trending, right?
Subtle
In this
hints to
direction.
tell the
Yeah.
people with a
Again,
magnifying
if you
glass.
go here, you notice those things. And if you're not, you're here listening to me. So I think that given the timing of this, we're just about a week removed from where we also broke the Boss Nation and Too Many Balls campaign last week. So I think that's sort of the beauty of being part of the internet hive mind, is that everyone's like, loves to react. But I think when it comes to this one, it's pretty evident that with some of the feedback that they got specifically from the players, which was really interesting to me in the coverage of this rebrand, was how there was that want to still sort of have that city connection and the concept of not losing the star. It's still the same old Chicago Red Star. There's just one now, and they're just going by the star. So it just sort of feels like they had a goal and they've achieved that. And whether or not people love it or hate it or like it's fine, that's for the public. But as far as like the main objective and the main goal of just kind of simplifying things and not trying to throw the tub out with the bathwater, they achieved that here, I think, with this rebrand.
Yeah, that's a very good summary of it. Early days of Chicago Red Stars in the NWSL, their kits even were light blue, white, light blue stripes with the, what is it, 5 red stars
It's
across.
4, yeah.
Sorry, Philadelphia.
No, it's okay. Like that, but that's part of it, right?
But that is the Chicago flag. That is
Yeah.
the city flag and the city emblem. And it was very ceremonious with the club. And I could see that confusion. It kind of looks one and the same from an outsider's perspective. This new rebrand that we got, it's so subtle. It's so subtle. They chose to go with more of like a navy blue and a little bit darker of a light blue than before. Just one ball, and it's Chicago Stars FC. So they will be called the Stars. Chicago Stars FC. There's a lot of movement here. Look at it visually, Sandra. You like it?
I'm here for the fun. I think looking at my own personal office background here, like I've got at what is now officially a retro version throwback of a Chicago, formerly known as Red Stars, scarf back there. So I'll definitely need an upgrade there.
Well, they're still the Red Stars for the next few weeks, right?
Yeah, the rollout's interesting. It's almost like this is a soft launch. You know what I mean?
It's like a tease. Like, get ready to call us this, but not yet.
Yeah, so they'll still be the Red Stars, for the remainder of this 1 week left in the regular season and through the playoffs. And then they're going to take the off season into 2025 to kind of do like that real official kind of concrete rollout, which we'll probably see even more merchandise. And who knows what these kits are going to look like moving forward. There's like still other steps to happen after this. It was cool getting to chat with the chief marketing officer, Kay Bradley, about it and how that there's so much intentionality behind this, and also with what it means to kind of operate as a brand, as a women's soccer brand, especially with the exception of the Kansas City Current. You have to operate in arenas that aren't yours, that don't belong to you. So there's a lot of game day operations that take place where you have to put up branding, take it all down. And so I think there's going to be some more stuff there that folks can get to see in 2025 as well.
I like this rebrand. I like it. It's very subtle, which could be confusing, I think, to some people. However, I like it. It's not so far of a left turn out of nowhere, rebranding everything. It's just changing a little bit of the wording, sprucing it up a little bit. Of all the clubs in the NWSL, this is not one that I thought Chicago needs a rebrand. There are some other clubs that I'm like, guys, you could spruce up the logo a little bit here. Like we can get out of the early 2000s and like get into something a little bit more just dynamic in terms of a logo. I like this though. It's a subtle move for Chicago. I think it indicates the starting of a new chapter under the new owners for them, a club that has been around for a really long time, since the WPS as the Chicago Red Stars, that this is a new generation and a new era of women's football that is being highly invested in. There is a lot of eyeballs on it. And I like this spruce up. I do. I'm like all about this. I also love that it comes as a soft launch, before we have to start doing it. As someone who works in this space and has to think quickly on my feet and say things very fast, when Seattle rebranded like a week before the draft, and then I had to host the draft, and be like, Seattle Reign. Oh, well, nope, it's Seattle. It was very difficult to get my brain around it. So I like this soft launch. I'm all about it. Let's go.
I love that,
Chicago
Lisa.
Stars FC.
We got to get you some merch, dude. I can't be the only one with something I'm wow. We got to get you a little something.
I got to get some merch. I got to get some Chicago Stars merch. So do all of you. If you like it, go buy stuff. NWSLshop.com, Chicago Red Stars. Get the old stuff too, because that's going to be retro literally by next year, and it'll be cool to have that. I like it. The players look good wearing it. I like the blues and the light blues, and I'm glad we got your take, Sandra. Big news. Chicago Red Stars rebrand to Chicago Stars FC. In the USL Super League, we've had some young players making their debuts. We're going to talk about it next, the pros and cons of being really young and playing professional soccer. Hey, welcome back to Attacking Third. In the USL Super League this past weekend, Carolina Ascent 14-year-old forward Stella Spitzer made her professional debut October 19th against Brooklyn FC, and she becomes the youngest player to debut in the USL Super League. Snaps and claps for Stella Spitzer. That is really cool. Congrats to Carolina Ascent for allowing that to happen. But this immediately sparked the conversation in our minds of, first of all, holy cow, 14 years old. We are old. We're old. I'm old. I'll say that. However, is this a pro? Is this a con? What's happening in women's sports and professional sports overall of having teenagers, young players play in the league? And we've seen this across the NWSL. You look at Gotham FC's player, McKenna Whittam, who made her debut as a 14-year-old. She signed at age 13, was with the team through preseason, and this past summer made her debut. You even think overseas internationally, Lauren James made her professional debut at 16 years and 30 days. She's just established herself as one of a young superstars. It happens at the men's side. Kevin Sullivan out of Philadelphia Union, he broke Freddie Adu's record, becoming the youngest player to feature for an MLS side this past summer, July 17th. He was 14 years old and 293 days. These are young players. And now we have Stella Spitzer, who is having us bring up this conversation again. What are the pros? What are the cons of being a teenager, a young player, and playing professionally? What do you think, Sandra? What are some pros? What are some cons of this?
Yeah, I think, spoiler alert, I don't think people are going to be shocked that you and I have similar pros and similar cons in this one, but that's part of the overall conversation, and that maybe some of the pros are that getting this sort of start professionally in the women's game is something that will bring a level of commonality in what we see in the men's side of the game. We hear about players playing so young on the men's side of the game, and that's just become happenstance. It's common at this point. It's part of global soccer culture. And maybe on the women's side, that's not necessarily the case. And I would narrow that lens even more so to American women's soccer, pro or domestic or international level, where that's not as common. So I think in that sense, we're like, this is going to be good to kind of help grow the game in that way. But there's other cons to it in which we're talking about the ways that the game is different. And for the women's side of the game, I think you and I can both agree that the infrastructure is also something that's not exactly level when it comes to getting younger players, young girls, really, in environments in which they can get development and grow as a player and kind of really start this path as a pro women's soccer player. I think you had good shouts there with Lauren James. I mean, when we got to talk to Casey Stoney kind of week in and out when she was coaching the Wave here in NWSL. Her perspectives is she also was someone that got a very young start in playing back in England, and then all of a sudden found herself coaching up Mel Barcenas, and who was a very young player, 15 years old, signing at the time with the Wave, and sort of the progress and the processes that need to take place for these young players as they're coming into professional environments, because it still, especially in the United States, it's very new concept.
Yeah, it's very new. There can't be a black and white rule for everything. There can be procedures put in place for these young players to help support them, right? You need the correct support staff around them. You need the correct facilities for these young players to be playing professional, but it can't be so black and white because everyone's situation is a little bit different. There are a lot of pros for being a young player, 14 years old, 13 years old, and competing professionally. If you're good enough, you should be able to do that. That is exposure.
Yeah.
That is developmentally incredible for your game. You are now competing at a higher level. And so often I've talked to coaches of players who coach them at the same level as they should be. So even someone like Stella Spitzer, if she's playing with a bunch of other 14-year-olds, she is going to be the best. She's going to be the best on that team. And she's not going to be pushed ever to be better because she is already leaps and bounds ahead of the players around her. So to put them in that professional environment does help their growth. They can contribute to teams. They can win championships. They can make money. If you're 14 years old, you're good enough at it, you should be able to make money. You can hone in on certain skills that you have. You can focus on it. You can develop yourself as a player, both on and off the field, right? Learning from someone who is 10 years older than you that has been a professional or even played through college and now is a professional, they can teach you things about the game, how to prepare, how to recover. There's a lot of things that you can learn when you're that young. However, there's also a lot of cons to being so young and playing professionally. And this is a case-by-case basis, but young kids should play all different sports. You learn so much. If you only play one sport from a really young age, it can hinder your athletic abilities to develop in different ways and different skills because there's so much crossover athletically and mentally from one sport to the next. And at 14 years old, you're still learning who you are, how to move your body. So often you haven't developed yet physically. Imagine like a 14-year-old going up against a 28-year-old, a 34-year-old. Those are very different. And you could be really tiny at 14.
Yeah.
And you're going into a hard tackle against a woman that is strong and has played professionally. Physically, developmentally, it's tough. There's going to be a big gap. Also, when you think of it logistically for teams, when you have such a young player, there are a lot of rules set in place that young players can't be in the same locker room. They can't share a room with older players. So specifically at Carolina Ascent, there are a number of academy players there. So Stella and the other academy players, they have their own locker room. So they're not even with the team, which, right, pros and cons to this, you're missing that camaraderie. You're missing the team aspect of being in a locker room because you are separated for very specific reasons. Even when you go on the road, if there are multiple academy players on the road with Carolina Ascent, they'll share a room together. But if a young player is there by themselves, they get their own room. They don't room with those other players. There's also a lot of pressure on a 14-year-old because think we're talking about it. There are headlines made around a player being young, making their debut, and there's pressure on them. And so often we have seen players be put into positions that not that they're not ready for, but they're young. And then there's all this pressure on them and it changes the way they play and it changes how they conduct themselves. And even Alyssa Thompson, who is much older than Stella Spitzer, went to the World Cup in 2023 and had a lot of pressure to perform and do well and went professional. And it took her a little bit to get back to her game. And we're now finally starting to see that with Alyssa Thompson. But there are a lot of pros and a lot of cons. If there's a rule or something that we could put into place, Sandra, what do you think it could be? Like, is there anything that can be done to help ease this transition or even make it less of a conversation?
Yeah, I think there are leagues that are trying to find solutions, to this. I mean, we're only maybe 2 seasons now into the U-18 mechanism that was introduced in NWSL. I'd like to see some more stability, or more, honestly, clarification on processes with some of the academies within the league. That's the other thing too. It's like we're starting to see that there's players who want to make this decision and they want to go on these journeys. So to your point, what are the resources that can be provided for these very young players? Because they're not coming out here signing with a team and then going out there a week later and playing 90 minutes. They're just not. And we actually have examples of that, in NWSL specifically. Olivia Moultrie signing a contract to play with Portland. There were some things that came in play, I'm sure there were a lot of elements involved in that. But this was a young teenager that was affiliated with Thorne's academy systems, and at times was able to participate in trainings with the senior team. I remember the spring preseason invitationals that Portland would put together, that Chicago find themselves often a part of, and the U-23s as well. And Olivia Moultrie kind of getting her first preseason minutes. And I remember this player needing to come off because she was exhausted from some of, having to keep up with what you see are just grown women on the pitch. But it was cool to see, because it's like, here's one of these moments, these kind of memorable kind of landmark setting moments for the league, where it's like, here's the youngest player to ever see preseason minutes. But you also see the other side of that at the same time. And it's for that reason why we haven't seen Olivia Moultrie until really the past 2 seasons getting regular starting minutes. It's a process. It takes time.
And I would say that Moultrie's position of being in the Thorns Academy and getting on the team and being able to train with the first team the last few years have helped her be able to be such an influential player for Portland the last 2 seasons. So there are elements to it that are very helpful for these players to develop themselves. There's also the whole mental side of it too, the maturity level. At 14, I could barely do anything for myself. I didn't know anything that was going on schedule wise in my life. Literally, I didn't. I just showed up and my mom would say, we're getting in the car. We're going to this soccer practice. We're going here. You have school. You have a thing after school today. I didn't know anything, let alone have a professional job and a job where you have to be so mentally sharp and also in charge of yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have someone there helping you along. It's very different. It's an interesting conversation. I'm glad we're having it. There are some people with us live on YouTube that are saying that they'd like to see additional certification for coaches to work with young pros. This is Gretchen. Shout out to Gretchen for this one. Maybe one exists, but yeah, there's a difference between having your A license and then also being able to also work with a 14-year-old, right? Yeah. It's very different. It's very different. We'll see. This conversation is going to continue to develop as I imagine players are going to be younger and younger and younger and younger, getting chances and opportunities. And this is no shade to Stella Spitzer. Congratulations. That is awesome. Go out there and show them what you can do in the S League. We're excited to watch you and excited to cheer you on. And congrats to Carolina Ascent for being able to allow a player to do this, put in some of the resources that they need to be successful both on and off the pitch at Carolina. Don't go anywhere, guys. We've got our In Case You Missed It news and notes segment next. Welcome back to Attacking Third. In case you missed it, A lot has happened. A lot has happened. U.S. women's national team youth midfielder Melanie Barcenas has become the third fastest goal scorer. Currently, the U-17 FIFA Women's World Cup is happening, and she made history as the third fastest in the FIFA Women's World Cup for the U-17s and the fastest goal scorer for U-17 women's youth national team history. It took less than 60 seconds for Barcenas to score against South Korea yesterday in their 5-0 blowout. Barcenas had a brace ultimately in this match. But let's go, Melanie Barcenas. We go from talking about young players making their debut, how they should be doing it, and then talking about Barcenas, who is a young player, absolutely crushing.
Right into it. We love a smooth segment transition. Love that, Lisa, and honestly love this for Mel B. Right? I think this is a player that I think once we saw that roster drop, we knew that folks were going to have their eyes on her. And, to sort of piggyback off our conversation, they're going to have eyeballs on Mel Barcenas because of her efforts with San Diego Wave, because she's getting some of that development alongside and within a fully professionalized league. So watching her, not only score once but twice and kind of achieve this moment with the national team and doing it in the number 13. Like, we kind of got to chat about that a little bit too. Her former teammate and the great Alex Morgan at this point, who recently retired. It's giving next gen. It's giving exactly what it should be giving. And I love this for her. I think we're all witnessing, I think, just the start of hopefully what this player can continue to accomplish at multiple levels for club and for country.
Sandra, give us the inside scoop here. Melanie Barcenas with the youth women's national team. She got to pick her number ahead of the U-17 FIFA Women's World Cup, and she picked 13. She then sent a picture to her former teammate and friend, Alex Morgan, who obviously wore the legendary 13 for club and country for so long before retiring just a month or so ago. Pretty cool. Yeah. Is there something I'm missing from that story, though?
No, I think you nailed it. I also just love that, Melanie's reaction to that, just being like, hey, number 13's in good hands, and Alex Morgan just piggybacking on that. Like, yeah, I know that's right. So I just
like, can I get one? She's like, can I get one for me and for Charlie and for the new baby along the way? We need a couple Barcenas 13s. Pretty cool.
You'll love to see it.
Love to see it. We are on the verge of an international break. It's happening. Canada soccer is set to go to Spain to take on Spain, the reigning world champions. Utah Royals forward Cloe Lacasse was called up to the roster. However, this past weekend, she only played 36 minutes in a 1-1 draw for Utah against Angel City before coming out on an injury. So she has been replaced by Canada soccer on the roster by forward from Benfica, Marie-Yasmine I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but she has been called up to replace Cloe Lacasse on the roster, 29-year-old midfielder. She earned her second cap with Canada earlier this year. Her first one came in 2022. She plays at Benfica, a great call-up and an opportunity for her to go straight to Spain and compete with Canada soccer. That match happening on Friday, October 25th, Canada against Spain. Some other big news to our siblings to the north. Forward Jade Kovacevic has signed as the Northern Super League's very first player. She signed with AFC Toronto, the 30-year-old forward. She is League One Canada's all-time leading goal scorer. And now she gets to play in Toronto. Finally, Sandra, we're seeing the rollout of the logos of the NSL, and now our first player.
It's building. The momentum is building, and I love it. I'm here for it. What an incredible time for women's soccer. And we get to see like kind of what, NSL is part of, serving its purpose, essentially. I think there's been this is something that has been in the works for a very long time. A Canadian women's professional soccer team is a very long time coming. Mm-hmm. I think when you go back and look at sort of some of the history that's been documented and the reporting around it. And so it just feels right that for AFC Toronto, this is the route that they went for this first signing, League One Canada's all-time leading scorer. Like, here we go. Cool. Let's go. Get excited about it. And it just like sets a precedent, right? Like I can't wait to see who else gets signed across the league.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Jade Kovacevic put out a little video that she saw that she was like, I'm just so excited to play, to bring domestic soccer to Canada Women's League and be part of history and make history. So you can watch her with AFC Toronto. From the Northern Super League to the Women's Super League, over in England, Arsenal midfielder Lia Walti made her 100th WSL appearance in Arsenal's 2-0 win over West Ham this past weekend. So congrats to her. We always like to shout out, how many caps and matches these are getting. Meanwhile, in the NWSL, Washington Spirit had an excellent offseason. They had 6 draft picks, and then they picked up some other players. And their rookie class was looking pretty stacked. And it didn't necessarily make for a great season because it's hard when you have so many young players. However, Adrian Gonzalez and Jonathan Giraldes have done a tremendous job at Washington in putting these rookies in positions to succeed. So Heather Stainbrook and McKenna Morris become the 5th and 6th rookies to score a goal this season for Washington Spirit. 2 weeks ago, both Stainbrook and McKenna Morris earned their first start against Racing Louisville. And then this past Sunday, they continued their starting ways, and Heather Stainbrook scored her first goal in the 31st minute, and then McKenna Morris scored her 4th goal in 4 games to help Washington to a 2-0 victory over Chicago. The rookies at Washington are lights out.
Dude, what's in the water? Like, what's in the water out there in DC? Like, what are y'all eating for breakfast, man? Like, let us get some of that. Like, what's going on here? It's incredible. It's been happening all season, Lisa. I feel like whenever we've been talking about Washington Spirit and their success, we are connecting lines to performances from their rookies. Obviously, Croy Bethune ate up a massive chunk of those storylines, but we have talked about how Hirsch felt on this show and her performances. And now here we are with just a week left in the regular season, talking about even more rookies for this team making an impact. There's no executive of the year award at the end of the season in terms of the individual titles that they give out. And I know that we'll talk about that later on, but I teased a little bit of that earlier in this season. And I have to imagine if you're Mark Krikorian, like if that existed, that this is someone that maybe we chat a little bit more about, because some of the movement to get such basically what is another wave of a young core of talent to this team, Spirit are going to be rocking.
And the coaching staff that Krikorian has brought in to this Washington Spirit side. Yeah, but credit to the players for being able to actually execute on the pitch, step up in a season full, just riddled with injuries, to be able to step up and into these various roles and produce. That is cool. So shout out Stainbrook and Morris. Keep going, guys. Keep going. Elsewhere in the NWSL, Houston Dash goalkeeper Jane Campbell broke the single season NWSL record against Seattle with 113 saves. Now, we always put a little qualifier when we're talking about goalkeepers and saves and breaking records, because that means you just face a lot of shots. But I think Jane Campbell's different because she has constantly bailed her side out time in and time again in the NWSL. So congrats to Jane Campbell. Love that one. Shout out to you. 113 saves. On Monday's Attacking Third show, we always do our moments of the weekend. And Sandra, I believe this was your moment of the weekend. We have our first Haitian player to score in the NWSL, Nérilia Mondesir. She delivered the game-winning goal for Seattle against Houston Dash. Pretty cool to see the continuous development of players, new players getting involved in the game, especially from a fellow CONCACAF region in Haiti.
Yes, you nailed it. That I had to go with that as my moment of the weekend, and honestly, it's still my moment leading into this next week because we're on international break. But we talked about breaking news, here on Attacking Third and with CBS Sports. We were talking about the Chicago Stars rebrand. That's something that we.
Did you almost say Red Stars? Did you almost say Red Stars there?
No, I said Chicago Stars. My whole chest, Chicago Stars. So I love that. And then I look at this player and we got to talk about her, during the summer when we broke the news of her arrival to NWSL. And I sort of feel like we've just been waiting for her to just get that kind of moment, just because of what we've seen from her with Haiti and all the coverage that we've done with our games on Paramount and CONCACAF. And it was incredible. I loved the goal. You saw how much it meant to her and to the team as well. So hopefully
really
she keeps cooking.
It was also a baller goal. It was a great goal too. Love to see
Authoritative.
it.
Authoritative.
Right through the 5-hole, Jane Campbell
Yep.
went right between her legs.
So,
all right, guys, that does it for our show today. But stick around this, YouTube podcast space, because Attacking Third we're active this week. We have a big interview coming up ahead of the Kansas City Current and Gotham FC NWSL Liga MX Femenil Summer Cup Final. That final is Friday. You can watch it on Golazo Network. It's also an international break. So we have U.S. women's national team action Thursday night against Iceland. Immediately following that match, 10 p.m. Eastern time, you can get a live recap with the Attacking Third crew. It'll be on Golazo Network at 10 p.m., also on YouTube. So right here where you're watching us today. Like us on podcast on YouTube, subscribe to us, because then you'll get alerts when we go live. And don't forget CBS Sports Network and Paramount Plus on Friday for the Summer Cup final between Gotham FC and Kansas City. Thanks everyone so much for watching and joining us. You can follow Attacking Third wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and review. We're available on youtube.com/Attacking Third, and you can watch us on CBS Sports Golazo Network for all your women's football coverage. For Mark and Sandra, I'm Lisa. This was Attacking Third.